The ever controversial titles of Afrocentric and Eurocentric still need to be discussed, and for this reason, we have to play a completely different perspective. I've played the European perspective, I've played the American perspective, and I've even played the African perspective. But let's play another one.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is your girl Christina, and in today's video I wanted to touch on the subject of these two terms that I see floating around a lot around YouTube sometimes, especially amongst Dominicans. The two terms being Afrocentrism and Eurocentrism.
So, the Dominican Republic, as I understand it, has got a lot of mixed people in there. In fact, I think the majority of people are mixed between Indian, black, and white. Usually they're called mestizo or mestizo, which you usually see that also in Mexico, which has got an increasingly larger and larger population of mixed people every single year. Now, the demographics of those type of countries have to be taken with a grain of salt, because a lot of the people who consider themselves white, depending on how far away or how long ago their history goes, are actually mixed as well. And the people who consider themselves black are also mixed. So you have to think about that before you talk about the mixed population as if it's a completely unique population compared to the others.
So this video is going to be in two parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about basically what these two terms mean and my thoughts on them. And then in the second part of this video, I'm going to give my thoughts on some things that I heard recently.
I'm glad she prefaced it this way, because there's a big difference between what words mean to you and what words mean. These are two completely different types of ways of looking at a word. So obviously Afrocentric, what it means to me is something way bigger and more important than what it just means to the world.
On YouTube, which I'll get to that in the second part of the video. And there's some things I feel that I have to address. Okay, so these words, Afrocentrism and Eurocentrism. So usually when I've heard either one, it usually has a type of negative connotation with them, especially Afrocentrism, and that is the one that I hear more. And like I said, it's usually said in like a negative way.
So remember, I said this before when I was doing the Metatron video, that I did not want him to call us Afrocentrists because I know that it's said in a negative way. That was not me making stuff up. That was real. People take this word in a negative way, and I didn't want him to dump a lot of weight to it, because as soon as you say Afrocentric to most people, I'm going to debate an Afrocentric. It means I'm going to debate a conspiracy theorist, possibly a black supremacist, and I'm going to debate someone who does revisionist history. That's what it actually means to the general population. So that's why I didn't want that word to be used as a thing. Now, secondly, remember I gave you the European version of it, and the European version was still more nuanced, where they said it's just a study of African culture, and then it had the negative part to it as well. And then the third one was the American one by Bad and Panada, and you saw there as well that it had its negative connotation as well. And now you're seeing a completely different perspective. Oh yeah, I showed you that African lady, and she said it had a negative interpretation as well, and it's way linked to African Americans, which I don't think is fair since it's for the entire African diaspora. Then again, this woman this time is saying I'm telling you, most people in the world do not see this word as a positive. Nobody actually sees it as a positive except the people within the group. And I'm far too familiar with people who call themselves Afrocentrist to think that they all have these same perspectives. They don't. It's quite diverse. But just like how the word feminism or any of these words get corrupted, they get corrupted too. Now, the part that is actually really sad from her perspective, I'm not saying that this is a world perspective, is saying that the word Afrocentric is worse than the word Eurocentric in her country. That tells you how far away this word propaganda has been distorted for Eurocentric, not just European learning or anything like that. Eurocentric to be not as bad as Afrocentric. That's a tragedy right there. That's awful.
So, as much as I have heard these terms, and I usually hear it directed towards African Americans, I decided
Even though African Americans played a huge role in Afrocentrism, the real one, they now are smeared with the term for a negative. And to some degree, there is some kind of claim like they're not real Africans. That's why they try and paint it with this. There are some people who live in the islands who think they're more African than African Americans, which is confusing to me.
to look up what are the actual definitions of these terms. So, I found the definitions online and I'm going to quickly share them with you guys. So, the term Eurocentrism. It is defined as a discursive tendency to interpret the histories of and cultures of non-European societies from a European perspective.
So let me correct that, because you can look at European culture or the world's culture from a European perspective and not be Eurocentric. I mean, there's so many examples of this. The ancient Greeks were from Europe and they were looking at culture from around the world, and they didn't look at it from a Eurocentric point of view. So you can look at the culture from a European point of view and not be Eurocentric. Eurocentric is something significantly different. This is different than Afrocentrism, even the most extreme versions of Afrocentrism. And I'm not including things that people call Afrocentrism, which is not, like Hebrew Israelites or something. When we look at real Eurocentrism, right, compared to real Afrocentrism. So Afrocentrists, a lot of them will believe that African people lie at the core of every culture, or black people lie at the core of every culture. This is different than the Eurocentric people who think that white people are superior to every culture. They don't think they lie at the core of those cultures. They think that their culture, no matter what happens, is superior. So let's read. Focusing on European culture or history to the exclusion of a wider view of the world, implicitly regarding European culture as preeminent. You understand that? It's not looking at the world. Afrocentrism, at its core, even at its most extreme, looks at the world and interprets it from an African point of view. Whereas Eurocentrism doesn't care about the world. The world doesn't exist to them. It's Europe and then who they can conquer. Now, some people could say, what about today? What about the 21st century? They're not really colonizing states. Well, I would say they're doing soft colonization, and they've already colonized, so they don't need to colonize. They've colonized the textbooks, colonized the minds, colonized everything. Even a simple statement, like I said, with one of those things of there were Ethiopians on Chinese boats, which is written down by Ibn Battuta. It sounds like a myth. Even though you can read it yourself, you can go and buy Ibn Battuta's book and look it up yourself. But people are still going to look at it like I'm making stuff up, because that's how deep Eurocentrism is. But if I said there were Vikings in China, everybody's going to be like, oh, that's pretty interesting, because we're looking at the world through a European lens. And I don't know why it's more interesting for Vikings to be in China than for Africans. To me, that's the most interesting thing that ever happened, because people thought that Africans couldn't do nothing.
Common features of Eurocentrism include ignoring or undervaluing non-European societies as inferior, as well as seeing Asian or African histories simply in European terms, or as parts of the expansion of Europe and its civilizing influence.
Okay, so with the rest of that understanding, then it puts it in the proper context, because there is a context that is different from Eurocentrism and Afrocentrism. I mean, how many people who are in Afrocentrism want to go and take over China right now? Whereas Eurocentrism, which is a global point of view, wants China to be like America. They want Japan to be like America. They want all these places to be like the others. Whereas Afrocentrism is kind of celebrating how places used to be by themselves. This does not mean that there isn't a universal Christian, Islamic, Buddhist, whatever your religion is, code of ethics that one would like to apply to the world. But Afrocentrists have never and really don't seem to have the plan to impose that on other cultures.
Okay, so y'all got that. That's Eurocentrism. Now, Afrocentrism is an approach to the study of the world's history that focuses on the history of people of recent African descent. And Afrocentrics regard themselves and all other Blacks as syncretic Africans and believe that their worldview should reflect traditional African values.
Okay, so let's break down that point of view, what she just said. So she said that the world, or Afrocentrism, the way she described it. Now look at the difference between these two, Eurocentric and Afrocentric. Afrocentric is the belief of focusing, she said recent, but also ancient Black people and the recent Black people, focusing on that, including world Blacks. So she used the word syncretic, which means the synchronization, the synchronized cultures of Black people around the world, including Black Americans, Native Americans. Doesn't mean they have to be African, they just need to be Black. Indians, Black Sumerians, Black Japanese, Black Australians, Black Europeans. So it's focusing on the Black part. Now remember that Afrocentrism was a pushback from Eurocentrism, which was white supremacy. And so that is the reason why there is a Black angle to it that is put. And the Black angle that is put to it is to show that they just ignored their own side of the history. There were Black Japanese people. When I say Black, I don't mean Black African. I mean dark skin, like Black people. Just like there were dark skin in Europe, like Black people. We have the pictures of that. Then there were dark skinned people in the Middle East. There are dark skinned Black people in the Middle East, especially in places like Yemen right now. Then there are dark skinned people everywhere, but these dark skinned people were ignored. If you look at the history of the world, when they don't show these dark skinned Black people, it tells you what type of story they're trying to tell. And so Afrocentrism is trying to do that. Now, do I have a problem with being called Afrocentric in that point of view? Hell no. But that's not the point of view that they use. I mean, think of what she said earlier. I've seen it used in a negative way. Yet, the way she just described it was not negative at all. So clearly the message is not going in the same way.
So that's Afrocentrism. So basically, what I get from both of these definitions is that they're both merely like a filter, like a lens through which you view the world. Either you view the world through the lens of Europeans and their accomplishments, and you view things as being European, or you view it through the lens of Africans and you see things as being as an extension of Africa, and you view all Black people, regardless of culture, as being an extension of Africa.
I don't fault her for interpreting this way. So obviously, looking at the world as an extension of Africa from the Afrocentric point of view is the truth. That's just the truth. The world is a extension of Africa. Human beings come from Africa, they expand, and probably every idea they ever have come up with started with some germ in Africa. It germinated from Africa. So that point of view just means that's the real point of view, which is why I have no problem with it. It is a lens in the true sense of the word. Obviously, you can have multiple lenses, but Eurocentrism is not a lens. Eurocentrism is a mirage. Eurocentrism is deliberate changing of the word. Eurocentrism is not the same as operating in the same glider or operating in the same ship as Afrocentrism. It's not two ships in the night sailing past each other. It's two completely different ships. One is a a target boat trying to destroy all ships, while Afrocentrism is the boat with lifeguards trying to put everyone back on course. And that's not just to make Afrocentrism seem better or nice or anything like that. I still have some problems, obviously, with some of the people who think that Sumerians are literal black Africans. Like, I don't believe that at all. And of course, I know that Afro-Asiatic languages are expansion of African languages. But when people start to say, I can compare Sumerian with African languages, nope, you can't. It doesn't make sense. I've looked into it. A lot of people have looked into it. It's too isolated. I promise you, if it was related to Arabic, they would have already said it. They would have already put it down and said, yes, it's related to Arabic. They would love to do that, but they can't. It's impossible. Then Indian languages, at some point, we separated about 70,000 years ago. At some point, the languages are going to be so far apart that they're going to be too far away from each other. Now, there are some similarities that will always exist, like sound effects and stuff like that. Like ne, in almost every language, the word ne means right. I don't know why, but it does. The word mama and baba and dada and tata, all of those, they all mean father and mother, but the words do not mean the same thing. But Afrocentrism is generally correct. If you take it, let's take it at its mildest, it's generally correct. But if you take Eurocentrism at its mildest, it's not correct, because it starts off with we're correct and everybody else can screw off. By the way, if you've seen my Jubilee video, then you probably know how far away that could be, where literally white Americans are claiming to be Native Americans.
So that is basically what I get from that. Now, when it comes to the Western world, Western civilization, basically all of the Americas, I think that
when it comes to the who?
When it comes to the Western world, Western civilization, basically all of the Americas, I think that all of our societies, whether you are American, like from the United States, Central American, Caribbean, well, maybe not, well, depending where in the Caribbean, and then South American, all of our societies are inherently Eurocentric.
So she brought up a word there that complicates things, the word West, which, by the way, most Westerners can't even agree on what the word West means. Like, why is Russia not part of the West? And then also, why is Mexico not part of the West? Is West just another word for white people we like? Or what does West mean? Successful Western states? Is that what the West means? Which is why some people, when they like to separate the so-called West from the other West, they say from the developed nations versus the non-developed nations, which, by the way, adds places like China and Japan in there, which is why it's also a complicated word. So the word West, to me, is one of these words that people use, but they have no idea what it means. They have different ideas of what it means. Whereas Eurocentrism is a straightforward word. Now, she says that all those countries are Eurocentric, and I wouldn't agree that all of them are Eurocentric internally, but I would agree that they have a foundation found in Eurocentrism, which means that a lot of their interpretations need Afrocentrism to push back, or other versions of historical lenses, including some of the Chinese point of views, in order to push back on what they believe. I remember I was watching a documentary a while back. Remember the one by Alice Roberts? I'm sure all of you have watched it. It's a BBC documentary about where we came from. And the Chinese guy in the video said that there's no way human beings did not fuse with some of these used to be considered prehistoric man, like Neanderthals and stuff. This was in 2009, I think. And that documentary said there's no way in hell human beings fused with those things. And then it turns out that we did. Had they listened to the Chinese point of view, they would have figured that out earlier. But instead, They deny, and then when it finally turns up in the DNA evidence through the Western way, then it is accepted.
Simply because of the fact that we were all colonized by European powers. So,
I don't want to complicate it even more, but I have to say this. This European power thing is only part of the story. Remember, Christianity is a Middle Eastern religion, Islam is a Middle Eastern religion. Europe was conquered by the Turks, the Moors, the Arabs, the some African lower than the Sahara, conquered by so many different types of people that at some point you've got to say, okay, so clearly there's other influences inside of recent European history that matters as well in this quote unquote Eurocentric point of view. By the way, I've shown you that almost all of the racist tropes that Europeans came up with were developed in the Middle East. All of it. All of it.
European cultures did basically form the foundation of many of our current cultures. Now,
okay, so she chose her words wisely that time when she said the foundation of their culture.
here in the United States, it's interesting because here, the United States is Eurocentric, but we don't necessarily call it that. Like, the foundation of American identity is white people. White people are basically the only ones that don't carry like a hyphenated name. Like people, like we don't call white Americans European Americans.
Because of people who keep referring to slavery, people in America forget that the hatred of black people in America, and I don't mean just the one that you have today, but the true hatred that a lot of Americans had, isn't that long time ago. It's not that long time ago. I mean, there were we went to the moon, and there were still places in America that didn't want black people going to the same school as them, going to the same places as them. Think about that. So this idea that it's the Eurocentric is just the foundation in America is not true. In America, it's the core of America, that you had to literally create new rules to get rid of that, to try and get rid of that. And for some people who think actually we're not living in Eurocentrism, I'll give you an analogy. You know, it's like an ant standing on a mountain. It doesn't realize that it's on a mountain because it's so small. Its perspective, anywhere it's on the mountain, always looks like flat land. But in reality, it's on a mountain. Human beings are a little bit better. We can tell we're on a mountain, but we're being in any continent or any place around the world. It's like we're ants on a mountain and we never see the curve of an injustice or the curve of retelling and reinterpretation. All we see is whatever's coming at us at that immediate moment, which is why we have to push back on every little thing. Otherwise, we will lose the curve.
But we do call black people African Americans, or we call, people of Latin descent Hispanic Americans or Asian Americans, but white people are simply Americans.
So I hate to be this guy, but we have to remember that a lot of these terms are also Eurocentric in their nature. The word African is kind of Eurocentric because, of course, Africans didn't really consider themselves a whole block of people until they had to push back. In fact, we know in the past that Africans used to fight with Europeans against other Africans and put those Europeans in front of those Africans because of shared values. This also happened with Middle Easterners and happened with other people. It's only when it became obvious that they were enemies that they fought against each other. And then, of course, this was true in Native Americans as well. It wasn't obvious to them that their next door neighbor, Native American, was more hostile or less hostile than the Europeans who just came along. And there is no real assumption that just because someone looks different than you, that they're going to be a worse opponent than your traditional opponents. So, yes, we live in a Eurocentric world, and that Eurocentric world has created bubbles of populations, which we continually refer to, which is why it's okay for Afrocentrism to refocus the world as human beings come from Africa. Therefore, all everybody is a descendant of Africa. Therefore, we should look at history in that way, a more objective way than singling out a continent and going, oh, continent means you're related to each other. But as soon as you cross the continent, somehow you're no longer related. Even if there's some slight genetic variation somewhere, that doesn't make any sense. That's all Eurocentric propaganda, which is why, even though now they're conceding that the ancient Egyptians were black, they're relying on, well, they kind of have Middle Eastern like DNA, therefore that means that they're not black. No, they're still black. Even if they have 100% Middle Eastern DNA, they're black.
So they're like the standard of American identity. So I just find it interesting that we don't really correlate whiteness from an American perspective with Europe, which I'm assuming is just because of the fact that, the Revolutionary War, the white people in America were trying to separate from the white people in Europe. So they purposely try to cut that cord in that European identity.
Well, it goes a little bit deeper than that. It also has to do with the fact that they wanted to completely separate and create a new identity in within America. So Native American, think about this word, Native Americans, as if they're a section of Americans. So in Europe, of course, it's not Native Europeans because they want to establish the idea that Europeans are just Europeans, the white people. But you don't really say Native Europeans. And there's a reason why things are set up in that way. Because if you say Native Europeans, then you mean there's another type of Europeans that's just as legitimate as the other Europeans if you don't believe in nativity or nativeness or whatever the word is.
And formed their own American identity. So that is why I think that happens here, and why we don't necessarily relate white Americans with Europe, even though they are descendant of Europeans. But y'all get what I'm trying to say. We don't call them European Americans. Even to say that, it's just weird.
Yep. And if you consider how relatively recent they've moved to that continent, then you will understand that not only is it not weird, but it's deliberate and scary how quickly you can poison the mind.
But anyway, but in Latin America, it's different because even though, with the Spanish speaking countries, for example, every one of our respective countries at some point fought for independence from Spain. However, a lot
and Portugal
of Latin Americans today still cling on a lot to that Spanish identity, and they still view Spain as their motherland.
That's also because there's a bit of propaganda to try and establish the idea that all the white populations within the Latin American, I guess, speaking world comes directly from Spain, when a lot of them actually come from the Italian area, and then a lot of them come from the British area. A lot of them come from all over Europe, but there is this understanding because of the language that and the dominating European groups that they all come from that area. And of course, people have been found with all kinds of DNA inside of the Latin speaking world. And it is a huge difference. There is a huge difference between that land and the Americas. The average American white person has been found to have 0.2% other. At least that was true for, the last 20 years, DNA wise. And they did DNA more than any other population in America. So that's not some fake result. That's real. Most Europeans stuck to Europeans. Although if you are a European, they're not testing the ones who claim to be mixed.
So it's just a different dynamic, if that makes sense. So for me, being a Dominican, I do not advocate for either. I don't advocate for Afrocentrism because Dominicans, we are not a pure black country.
The version of Afrocentrism that she talked about, you don't have to be a pure black country to advocate for it. And anyone who would advocate for Eurocentrism is a very terrible person.
Our culture is not fundamentally African. So I don't think that you can view like Dominican history, Dominican culture, or even Dominican genetics through a totally African lens.
While the word totally there will always leave a bias, so you can't view anything in the world through a totally anything lens. You can't even view the world through a purely scientific lens because any lens that you look at will be blind to the other sides of things. I mean, there's so much stuff that science has not been able to figure out using its lens, and they just, in some cases, they just gave up and said that's the world of the philosopher. Go ask the philosopher. What's that in quantum physics there where they say shut up and calculate? They say it's not the job of the scientist to figure out why quantum physics works the way it does. So there are some things in this world where you have to adjust your scope, and starting off at a weird place will get you further than just looking at it from a one point of view. So I do agree that you shouldn't look at things at one scope. That's what I do. I try to look at things. That's why I'm doing this video, because I try to look at things from multiple points of view, which is why some people have no idea what I'm talking about. They have no idea that there are black people in this world who look at them like, oh yeah, Afro. Just go to someone who believes this and say, "Hi, I'm Afrocentric. Do you want to hear my opinion on anything?" And watch them say no.
However, I do not advocate for Eurocentrism either because we have way too much black in us to sit here acting like we're just Spanish or just European. And not just that, but Dominican culture, though fundamentally it is, European, there's still a heavy African influence and there's a Taino influence in there as well.
I'm glad she added the Native American group in there, the Taino Indians, because it's important to understand that even the Afrocentric and the Eurocentric and the whatever lenses, they're not complete because there is a group that is completely shut out from history. Their words, their writing, their life, everything is completely ignored, which is one of the reasons why I don't support stealing their history either. Do I still look at them as if they're black people? Absolutely. And I think if we don't do that, white people will try to absorb them into the giant group of European or white or whatever. And I've seen certain groups, I think Hebrew Israelites as well, I've seen certain groups try to absorb them within their groups by misinterpreting history. No, tell the history as it was, but include them. That's the best way to do it.
So I'm not going to sit here trying to act like we're just some straight up Europeans when we're not. Like,
Well, even Europeans from Europe, directly in Europe, should not be practicing Eurocentrism. They should push away from that.
genetically, we're not. Culturally, we're not. Yeah, we're just not straight up Europeans. So for me, I do not advocate for either. If there is one type of ism that I would, support, it's nationalism.
I could have bet a lot of money there. I would have lost. I would have never guessed that she wanted to push for nationalism. Now, I don't know what nationalism means within that specific territory, but nationalism is not the best idea. I'll be honest with you. To some degree, we have to have a halfway between nationhood and global hood, global neighborhood. Not ism. I don't like nationalism and I don't like globalism, but I do like nationhood and global world. Nationhood meaning that you can't just let anybody come in and just start running your country. Your country is gonna go. It's gonna get destroyed. But at the same time, you can't have people looking at that one nation as if, you know, if everything is going bad in my nation, I have to stay there, or I have to, if something's going bad in the next next door and people are going to contribute to my country. No, they have to stay in their little pot. No, 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 no. That's not how things can work. So it has to be a halfway point between those two. Now that's the hard part of figuring out what the difficulty or the ease of it is, but that's how it works. Now here's the reason why it's important to do that, because I think it was Tupac who said this. It's like poor people, they first ask. That's what they do in the beginning. Then the hungrier they get, they start to, get rowdy and do less asking. And then, when they really get poor, then it's no longer asking, it's taking. And you do not want that to happen. That's why you have to take care of the globe. We can see, look around the world at certain nations that hate other nations, whether they're poor or rich. At some point, if you don't take a global point of view, it will hurt you in the future. It seems fine and pretty to say just look at your own country, but I promise you that's not going to help you in the future. Because I mean, let's take the world that we live in today. There are some places in Africa that minded their own business. They had no expansion ideas. They didn't want to go to Europe or the Middle East or anything like that. But the Middle East and Africa and Europe came to them, took over. And even in Europe, when some of the places wanted to be isolated, people are still going to come. People in the Middle East, isolated people are still going to come. Because if there's free land somewhere, not free, but if there's land somewhere, people are going to come, and there's nothing you can do about it. No isolationist laws within your country can stop outsiders from coming in.
Because I feel like that is more of a specific focus on like the country itself, and that encompasses everyone regardless of race. And I think that is one way to show more of a national pride in your country.
I think she's talking about being patriotic and being, a servant of your country. I don't think she means nationalism. That has a little extra to it.
So that I am okay with, as long as it's not taken advantage of and it's not laced with like xenophobia and racism, which sometimes happen within nationalism. But
Well, it almost always happens because the focus on the nation itself will breed certain ideologies. Because, I mean, nationalism, if you look up the definition, there's a lot of things you kick out in order to have nationalism, which is prioritizing the state even over individuals and groups. And I don't think anybody wants to do that.
for the most part, that is one ism I'm okay with. Now, so there are some videos I've been seeing lately, some from other YouTubers, and I'm not going to say no names because, I'm not on here to bash other Dominican YouTubers, or I mean even non-Dominican YouTubers. Like, I'm not here to try and call nobody out and start no drama. The last thing I want is drama on my channel.
I would say if it's merely disagreement, it's okay to call people's name, but I've been on YouTube long enough to know that a lot of people, when you disagree with them, for some reason, that's grounds for hatred. So I understand not wanting to call out their names.
Y'all know I try to stay away from that. But there are just some things I've been hearing and that I heard that I just couldn't not touch on it. Like I just felt like I just needed to speak on this. So so it ties in with the second question here. Whether Afrocentrism or Africanism, whatever you want to call it, is taking over DR.
So I'm not going to lie, without context and, of course, without the original person's video, I have no idea what she's talking about. And she's saying taking over DR. I assume that Eurocentrism is still at the heart of a lot of these countries. So maybe she's right, maybe it's not, but let's hear what she has to say about it.
So this seems to be a reoccurring topic I keep hearing lately. And my thoughts on that are as follows. So, I do not see there being a substantial change in Dominican culture. Dominican culture is not changing. Dominican values are not changing. Now, what is changing is that Black Dominicans have kind of had like this awakening where they are embracing and celebrating their African roots a lot more than they were previously.
Nothing wrong with an awakening, nothing wrong with celebrating your African roots. And it sounds like basically they're learning and becoming well more educated so that they don't get trapped in the mind of trying to be second rate Europeans, but instead being true to who they really are and understanding their core culture. I'm surprised that they didn't this whole time, since there's been so much push against it in so many of these countries. I mean, you take up African Americans. For the longest time, African Americans have been insisting that they're African. I mean, even the word African American tells you where they lie, even though there's other African Americans, which you can find them all over YouTube, who insist that they have nothing to do with Africa. Unless, of course, once they start talking about Egypt, and then they're like, you're West Africans. Like, I thought I had nothing to do with Africa. But, that's the game they play.
And this seems to be upsetting some people. You have more, again, darker skins, Black Dominicans that are, rocking their natural hair, they're basically being unapologetically Black and or just identifying as Black, whatever. And again, this is upsetting some people.
Just imagine that. Because they choose a specific hairstyle that sort of matches the history, or they dress like the people from their own place, somehow that makes other people angry. Now I do understand the cosplay type of people, the overdoers that sort of dress funny for some random reason. I understand why some people have a problem with that, even though I wouldn't say anything, I wouldn't do anything to the person. But I do understand that certain point of view, that why that's kind of annoying sometimes. But in general, like people looking like how really look like in real life, based on the continent they come from and what the people in their continent look like, why would you ever have a problem with that? It's ridiculous.
Now, my question to that is if it's okay for a Dominican to be proud to be white, why can't a Black Dominican be proud to be Black?
In this context, I would say that maybe pride is not the right word. Maybe the word that needs to be applied is embracing your true history, embracing your nature, embracing who you really are as a person, whether you're white or Black, embracing it, being like, I'm a white person. I'm not going to go and put an afro on my head. I'm not going to darken my skin or something like that. And if you're an African, I'm not going to lighten my skin. I'm not going to uncurl my curls. I'm not going to do any of that. And I think that level of embrace is different than pride, because pride, it has a lot of stuff that comes with it.
Why? Like, what is the issue there? I don't understand how that affects other Dominicans when they see Dominicans either rocking braids or rocking a curly fro or whatever it is, rocking their natural hair. And remember, by natural, that doesn't mean disheveled and crazy. It just means like how I'm rocking my hair right now. This is my natural hair. Not
Notice how a lot of things always come down to the sort of domestic point or the pedestrian point. Things like hair. I'm assuming she's gonna bring up dating and stuff like that. Like a lot of these topics, even though they're pretty large, where they really affect people is in their personal lives, where now you have to make decisions on a personal point of view. Do I go out like this or do I go out like that? And that is a huge concern for some people. For others, they don't care. Although it should be a huge concern. It's going to affect you either way.
straightened or anything. How does that bother you? And how is that Africanizing DR? Which brings me to my second point.
By the way, there's nothing wrong with Africanizing any place as well. There is some mixed messages from some people where they don't want certain people of other cultures to copy certain things from Africa, but that's just how globalization works. Certain things will hit and people from around the world will embrace them as well. You know, you've seen Koreans dance like Africans as well, whether it's hip hop, whether it's African beats, whether it's whatever.
Is how can something that's already been there be taking over? Let us not forget that it was us, Dominicans, Santo Domingo, not the United States, not anywhere else in Latin America. We were the first ones to bring over African slaves 500 years ago.
It's kind of scary.
So, again, how can something that has been in the Dominican gene pool, that has been such a substantial part of our culture, our genetics, our history, how can that now be taken over? And, I hear certain people saying that basically we were like white.
Okay, so this is an important point that also came up in those Jubilee debates, which is this idea that America was white first before it was black, which is not true. And I think people forget hostility. The people who came here, the Europeans, when they came here, they were very hostile to the natives. It's not like they were embraced by the populations, and there were other populations in the region as well. It's such a hard thing to talk against because sometimes I feel like why are we talking about this as if like these are adult conversations? Because to some degree they're not. Like we all know the truth about what happened in the Americas and how it happened. So why are we even entertaining some of these?
And then now all of a sudden we're like this super black ass country. So I'm just like, all right. So these thousands upon thousands of slaves that were brought over between the 15 to like, I don't know, some point in the 1800s or whatever, where did they go? Where did they go? They just disappeared. Did they go run over with their African slave friends in Haiti? I'm pretty sure they didn't, considering Haiti was 10 times, or the slavery was 10 times worse in Haiti. Where did they go?
I've tried to make this point as well with the Middle East, which I think the black people who live in that area, because they don't speak English, they've been completely ignored by a lot of the people of the diaspora, which, you know, that is one of the reasons why they, even though they consider themselves black and they tie themselves to Africa, they disconnect with a certain version of black people because they are ignored because they do not speak English, which tells you Eurocentric. You must speak a European language or we don't care.
Where? And I know that the slave population in DR, it wasn't like huge, but it was enough. Okay, there was a good amount of black people on our side of the island. So where did they go?
So I'm not going to pretend I know a lot about the country's history, but I do know that there must have been people who come from either islands and the Americas proper who were black who came to those islands. Also, I assume there were people who were free as well. That's just the history of America. They don't talk about those black people for some reason. And they don't talk about, by the way, the word free, I didn't mean to use that word. The word free makes it sound like the default is to be imprisoned. So there were some people who were never enslaved as well, who existed in those areas, people who partnered from Africa and would go to America and then return.
Let's not act now like the blackness in the R came after, these invasions from Haiti or after Haiti took over. Okay. Now, granted, I know that there were Haitians that crossed over into DR, and a lot.
So before I wrap up this video, I want to say a couple of things. One, I think I might have said Democratic Republic at some point, which is not the name. It's Dominican Republic. I only said that because that word rolls off of the tongue much easier. Democratic Republic, which is the Congo. But I was not talking about that. I was talking about the Dominican Republic, which I why I kept saying the Americas. And also, if quote unquote Afrocentric ideas are to be believed, one of the easiest places for ships to have landed there, whether you're talking about the ancient ships from the Moors or the ships from Nigeria in the Mali Empire, the easiest places they could have landed is Brazil, one of them. The other one is the Dominican Republic, and Tobago, and all these other places. So yes, thank you very much for watching. Like, share, subscribe. Expect more, because we're gonna keep going.